thank the basketball gods for Tobias Harris. I'm recording this right after the 76ers win over the New York Knicks in New York. It was an ugly, disgusting, gross performance of basketball from the 76ers. That game was way too close to begin with. But thankfully, Tobias Harris, for the second time in the last couple of days, steps up, puts the team on the back. In my opinion, proves he's an all-star. He hit the game-winning three, and then less than 20 seconds later, forces the turnover that all but sealed the victory. Simmons was good. Josh Richardson was great down the stretch. Had a majority of his points in the fourth quarter. Korkmaz continues his transcended into a legit NBA player. Was hitting shots in the corner, hitting shots top of the key, off the dribble, in the pick and roll, in transition, getting fouled. Tobias Harris obviously was our closer, put the dagger in the game. Marcus Morris for New York, I mean, he can ball. And he's been a solid player in the NBA the last couple of years, but he's truly progressed himself into a legit baller. I believe he's second in the NBA in three-point percentage. And if anything tonight, as he scored in the mid-range from three in the post with Ben Simmons guarding it for most of the game, this was a tryout game for Marcus Morris. So he said, Brett Brown, Elton Brand, watch me play. Look how good I am. Come get me. Come trade for me. I'll fix your roster. Anyways, my name is David Esser. I'm the host here of the Ring the Bell podcast. I write and talk for Philly Sports Network, Sixer staff writer. You can find me on Twitter at PhillyInsider99. You can find me on Facebook, David Esser and David Esser Sports. But yeah, we have a lot to talk about here in episode 3. We obviously have to talk Ben Simmons. It wouldn't be a Sixers podcast without talking about the ever-controversial Ben Simmons. But this is, I think, a good time where it's understandable. With Joel Embiid out, all eyes were focused in on Simmons. He's the second best player on the team. He's the only other All-Star who's made the All-Star game as a 76er. I mean, him and Embiid were the All-Stars last year. He's star number 2. So with Embiid out, it was the media's and the reporters and the fans, all eyes on Ben Simmons. How is he going to respond without Joel Embiid? I think it's important to talk about this kind of newfound obsession with Brandon Ingram. In the last week or so, the media has just picked up on this Brandon Ingram hype, which, spoiler, I'm not buying into, but for some reason, it's also getting tied back into Ingram versus Ben Simmons, who's a air quote, better fit for the Sixers. So we'll get into all of that. We have to talk Al Horford. I just recently published a 2,000-plus word article about how the Sixers could trade away Al Horford. It wasn't clickbait. It wasn't a joke. I think it's a legit possibility the Sixers have to explore either this deadline or in the offseason. And I think a lot of people believe I want Horford to fail. I want nothing more than for Al Horford to succeed. My goal of the podcast, I'm putting this out there, is that Horford will see this and he will say, dang, David is upset with me. He's angry with me. He wants to trade me. I'm going to listen to that and I'm going to be better. I'm going to bully Al Horford into being better. But we're paying him so much. He's locked in with the team for so long. I want nothing more for him to be an absolute rock in our starting lineup. So we'll get into some of my complaints and even touch on the trade conversation. And obviously it is trade season, so sticking with that theme, we're going to look at some of the continued 76ers rumors, some of the trades we've been linked to, touch on the roster construction, which trades even make us a better team. You see a lot of hypothetical trades and rumors, and sometimes I'm not even sure if that makes us a better team. So we'll touch on that, touch on the current roster construction. But before we jump into those bigger topics, I want to quickly just recap over our last couple games this week. Sixers played 4 games in the last 7 days, which is actually a lot in NBA standards. So just kind of quickly recapping, get everyone up to speed. Week started off with kind of our last sour note before this team switched gears a little bit. we got absolutely dogged by the Indiana Pacers. And this is an Indiana Pacers team that still doesn't have Victor Oladipo. And they beat us twice now. And they beat us twice convincingly. So that was gross. No one really looked like they were interested. Horford had a bad game. Simmons wasn't incredible. But then, short-term memory, the team pulled it together, and they took down the Nets, which in my opinion was a very solid win. They had just gotten Kyrie Irving back. Historically, we are terrible against Kyrie Irving. He slaughtered us on the Celtics last year. So that was a really good win to us. Not only did we absolutely clamp Kyrie and take him out of the game, but Tobias Harris had what I called on Twitter the, quote, Tobias Harris is an all-star game. Maybe I said Tobias Harris is a max player. At the same point, Harris was phenomenal. He had 34 points. He had 9 in the last 2.5 minutes. He hit clutch shot after clutch shot, whether it was a 3 mid-range, drive into the basket. He was the closer and the late-game scorer that this team has needed and still needs. Even with Embiid coming back, if Harris can continue that form, that's nothing but good news. There's something about when you need a bucket, having a guy who can score off the dribble as opposed to down the post. That's something every team needs. We then took on the Bulls at home. It was a pretty standard win. Zach LaVine for Chicago, he did a good job of keeping it close. But for the most part, Simmons scored a lot. Harris was fine. Al Horford actually had a half-decent game. Again, buying me back into Al Horford. But that was a fine win, solid win. No complaints there. 2 in a row. And then obviously tonight, win over the Knicks. It snapped a 6-game losing streak on the road. Harris was clutch again. Nothing but, it was a disgustingly close game. However, it's late January, on the road, in New York. I'm not going to sit here and cry about it being close. Like a win's a win. The Bucks have won close games against bad teams. The Lakers have lost a bad. So it's a win's a win. Don't look too deep into the fact that it was a close win versus a blowout win. Obviously, a blowout win's more fun, but a win's a win. Now, in those 4 games, Ben Simmons recorded 20-plus points in each game, in each appearance. So 4 consecutive 20 or more point games for Ben Simmons. And this is how we now transition into our ever-controversial 6'10" point guard. So there's 2 sides to this. So let's start first with the positive sides. What has Ben done well since Embiid has gone out? And I think for starters, just looking at a statistical production standpoint, he has increased his scoring. Whether it's in the first half or the second half, his points per game has gone up. He's more active when it comes to generating the offense. He's more active in transition. He's far more active finding his shots. You see it 3-4 times a game where he just puts his head down and just dunks. Maybe that's not what you'd like to see from a point guard, but 2 points is 2 points in my book. So that's one of the big positive things in an offense that's so reliant on Embiid dropping 30 points most games. 20 to 30 points, Simmons has at least carried part of the slack. Other players have stepped up too. Tobias has been better. I think Josh Richardson has been better. A guy like Kork Maz he's scored 17, 20 points the last couple of games, so he's obviously stepped up a ton too. But Simmons is the catalyst for a lot of that. A lot of the times other people are scoring, it's off his passes. So just from a statistical standpoint, he has stepped up. Now, getting into one of the more negative points is, so what's with Simmons in the first half versus Simmons in the second half? I believe I saw a stat on Twitter where it said Simmons in the last 4 games has like 2 points in the fourth quarter. And that's not a result of him taking and missing shots. It's a result of him just not shooting in the fourth quarter. Now, there's 2 ways to look at this. Number one is he's scared. He doesn't like the clutch. He's not aggressive. He's not a scoring point guard. Whatever you want to call it, which that's obviously a negative perception of it. And I'm not going to say that's completely invalid. There's obviously merit to the fact that you normally want your best player, and in this instance, he is our best player with Joel out. You normally want him taking some shots down the stretch. Now, the other approach to this is that he's focusing on what he's best at, which is setting up other people. It's not his fault if he kicks it out to Al Horford and he's wide open and he misses the shot. Or if he runs a perfect pick and roll and Korkmaz is wide open and he misses the shot, or Harris misses the shot, or Josh Richardson misses the shot. If you watch each game, you can tell, some of the looks Simmons creates with his court vision and his command for double teams or collapsing paints when he attacks, even in the fourth quarter when teams aren't necessarily scared of him looking to score. It's immense because people are wide open, but the team can't really shoot. Now, so maybe you tell Simmons, hey, bud, we ain't got the shooters to utilize your best trait, which is his passing. You got to start going to the rack. You can have that argument, or the other argument is, hey, Simmons' teammates just have to make more shots. Now, I'm obviously leaning more towards the make more shots argument. Some of these are just wide open. But I'm not going to completely refute the idea that taking 0 shots in the fourth quarter, even in January, you can give me a little more. Specifically in games when Simmons scores 20 points in the first half. There's no reason to take your foot off the gas. I know you've got your points, and I know maybe you're trying to get your teammates involved, but I don't think any of the teammates are ever going to be upset if Simmons decides to ball hog for a night and drop 35. The other third kind of aspect is the defensive side of things. Most times in the fourth quarter, Simmons is guarding their best player. That surprisingly is not, or unsurprisingly, that's not like a super easy task. It's hard to be guarding the best player on your opponent's team, holding him to 0 points, or 2 points, 3 points, and then also being expected to score and run the offense every time your team goes down to score. So I think there's merit to saying, even against the Knicks tonight, he was on Marcus Morris the entire fourth quarter. That's exhausting. And that commands just as much effort, intensity, and talent as being the closer on the offensive side of things. So this kind of swings us into a subtopic here, the Brandon Ingram, Ben Simmons conversation. So in the last 10 to 12 games or so, Brandon Ingram has really caught fire. And he's been good for most of the season. He's averaging over 20 points for the first time in his career. He scored 40 plus the one night. He's hitting game-tying shots, game winners. The Pelicans have kind of figured things out, and they're pushing towards a playoff spot. And this has gotten a lot of people to ask the old question of, okay, so who would the Sixers rather have? This is bizarre to me, like crazy bizarre. Brandon Ingram is good at one thing. He can score, and he's a volume shooter. Like, he's scoring when he takes a lot of shots. He's shooting with good efficiency. He's not shooting with great efficiency. So he's a good scorer. Ben Simmons, on the other hand, is great at a lot of things and bad at one. Not even bad, average. He's an average to above average offensive player. He's obviously limited because of his jump shot, but when he's driving to the hoop, he's unguardable. So I would even classify him in the above average in the offensive side of things. The last couple games, he's scoring 20 points every game without even shooting the ball in the second half. But he is an elite defender, an elite rebounder, an elite passer. He's elite in transition. He's elite running both ends of the pick and roll. So Brandon Ingram is better than Simmons at one thing. Everything else, Ben Simmons is superior in. So if this is 2K, if we're playing NBA 2K on the old PlayStation, right? Maybe you take Ben Simmons maybe you take Brandon Ingram because he makes a couple more threes, right? Or because he can do a crossover step back jumper. If I'm building an NBA roster where I care about rebounding, defense, assisting, potential, age, whatever. Like, it's Ben Simmons by a mile. And then an argument I've seen on Twitter from a lot of different people is, oh, well, Brandon Ingram's obviously developing and Simmons hasn't developed at all. That's ludicrous as well. What is Brandon Ingram developing into? A undersized power forward that can shoot? That's what we always thought he was. Brandon Ingram's biggest knock when he came into the league was that he was undersized. Has he put on any weight? He's like 6'9", 190 pounds. I weigh more than that. His biggest knock was that he needs to put on size to be a legit small forward, power forward. I mean, he gets cooked on the defensive end of things. He's too small. You want him guarding Kawhi in the finals? You want him guarding Giannis? You want him guarding Oladipo? Ben Simmons' biggest knock, obviously, is he can't shoot a jumper. But you can't sit here and say, oh, well, Ben Simmons hasn't developed because he can't shoot, when he's averaging close to a triple-double making all-star games, and in the playoffs for now, it's going to be the third year in a row. Whereas Brandon Ingram's, who's, quote, developing, right? His team's a 10th seed. His biggest knock, he's made zero progression on. Like, we always knew he could shoot and score. This was never a question. Ben Simmons, we never knew he was going to be an all-defensive player. You know, we never knew he was going to be averaging close to 10 rebounds per game. We never knew he was going to transform the Sixers into a 20-win team into a 50-win team. The idea that he hasn't developed more than Brandon Ingram is strange to me. This will be the first season Ingram has averaged over 20 points a game. Yes, he can score the ball better than Simmons, but he can't do anything else. And he's not at the extent of a scorer where he's so good that you don't care about the other stuff. Steph Curry is such a phenomenal scorer. It doesn't matter that he can't play defense. You know, Klay Thompson is such a phenomenal shooter. It doesn't matter that he can't really score off the dribble. You know, I don't know. Well, give me another example. Like Kevin Durant. He's so ungodly talented at scoring the basketball that it doesn't matter that he can't put on weight, that he's undersized. Brandon Ingram isn't even close to that level. He's scoring 25 points a game on a team that's not even good. So, I've seen this debate. I think it's crazy. I think in a couple years it'll be so abundantly clear who the better player is and who's better for the Sixers. The fit is terrible. The Sixers were a shot away from being in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Considering they're led by a 23-year-old and a 25-year-old, 26-year-old in Embiid, that's pretty impressive. There's no other team in the league that can say they're that close to being a finals team while being that young. The Lakers are a finals team, but they're led by a 35-year-old player, whereas the Sixers might be an Eastern Conference Finals team led by a 23 and 26-year-old. So, I think it's foolish. It's an interesting conversation. It'll be curious to see where the two teams sit at the end of the year. But as far as who I'd want, who I think is the better fit, I think it's Simmons by a landslide. So, speaking of players that I haven't bought into, like I haven't bought into Brandon Ingram, let's talk Al Horford. My friend. Me and Horford have a love-hate relationship. If you follow me on social media, again, at Philly Insider 99 on Twitter, or you can find me, David Esser, on Facebook, you will know I've had my grievances with Al Horford. It's funny because my first article that I wrote for the Philly Sports Network was about Al Horford and how he was already showing his purpose for the Sixers. It was right after we beat the Celtics opening night. He came in, he logged in a ton of great minutes. Next to Embiid, without Embiid, with the bench, with the starters. And I was like, dang, this is what the team is missing. And then it's just been downhill ever since. Just to read you off some stats. So tonight, or last night against the Knicks, he had 4 points. 4 points. I think he was 0 for 6 from 3. Geez. In the last 4 games, and this is kind of peak, we're playing good teams without Embiid. Al Horford's averaged 12 points per game while shooting 39% from the field. And this is without Embiid. I mean, Horford, I mentioned this last week, Horford was critical of Brett Brown for not using him right because he was playing next to another center. Okay, Horford, here's your turn. No Embiid on the court. I mean, I'll give you the Nets game as a kind of a pass because they have good centers. Jared Allen, DeAndre Jordan are fine. But I mean, the Pacers, Sabonis, you're going to get beat down by Sabonis? The Knicks? Taj Gibson? Really? You're going to get outscored by Taj Gibson? Chicago? I didn't even know who their center was. They said something like it was like his fourth game playing. I had no clue who that guy was. And I'm pretty in sync here with the NBA, and I had no idea who the Bulls starting center was. 12 points per game, 39% shooting. In those 4 games, he's also been shooting 17% from beyond the arc. And again, if you watch the game, I would say 75% of those shots are open threes. Like wide open threes. Like Simmons is dishing to him and he's wide open. And he's hitching his shots and he's rushing his shots. And he's hitting the left side of the rim and then the top of the backboard and then the front of the rim. I mean, they're all over the place. This doesn't look like a guy who's out of rhythm. This looks like a guy who legitimately just can't shoot. Which is sickening to me considering how many big shots he hit against us last year in a Celtics uniform. Now, you hear a lot on social media about how, okay, Horford's job was never to be a scorer. He adds other things to the team. I agree. His passing, as far as I'm concerned, has been fine. I think he's still a great passer. But, I mean, his rebounding, it's not been good. He's a below-average rebounder. I was watching the Knicks game, and there was multiple possessions where Horford was on the court, and the Knicks got 2-3 shots off in one possession because they just kept tipping balls out, or they were just getting offensive rebounds. In the last 4 games, he's averaging 7 rebounds a game. Again, as the starting center, no Embiid. There's no one to get in his way. He can get as many rebounds as he wants. He's averaging 7. 7 rebounds per game this last week. Defensively, which was, I would say, the main selling point of bringing him in was that he was so good defensively because he can guard multiple positions. He's not been great defensively. Again, he was outscored by Taj Gibson. Dude's been in the league for like 20 years. He doesn't, just doing the eye test, he just looks slow defensively. These young guys, whether it's Mitchell Robinson or if he was on Lauri Markkanen against the Bulls, Jared Allen had a field day. Like, they just look quicker. They look more explosive. They look faster. They look more energetic. Al Horford doesn't have that same kind of pep in his step that he did when he was guarding Embiid last year in a Boston jersey. So what's the solution? Because there's I would say there's 3. And I think 2 go hand in hand and one's the more drastic one. Again, I wrote a 2,000 plus word article the other day that got very mixed responses, most of them positive. So if you read it and you left a nice comment, I appreciate that. But the article was about how, 3 scenarios where you could realistically trade Al Horford. And pretty much all 3 included a huge dump of draft picks, which sucks. Not only are you trading away a player that you pretty much maxed this offseason, but you have to convince another team to take him on. That's how bad his contract's looking right now. $28 million till he's 37. Another 3 years of this. Pretty much every deal included us dumping prospects, dumping draft picks, saying, please take him off our hands and give us just something in return. I talked about maybe dumping him off for Bogdanovich out at Sacramento, and they might not even take that. I think the deal that I included that was the most realistic was us dumping him to Detroit or Washington for just a slew of backup shooters, which is terrible. But it frees up cap space. It gets us out of this long-term contract. And realistically, a guy like Burton's from the Wizards or Markieff Morris from the Pistons, they might help us more than Al Horford. The other scenario, and this is the one that's going to happen, is we're going to make him fit. Or Brett Brown's going to do everything he can to make him fit. I don't know when that change happens. Right now, his role as the pick and pop, stretch the floor guy, it's just not there. And it's only going to get worse when Embiid comes back. Because any points Horford's getting right now down in the post, those are going to evaporate the second Embiid comes back. And until he figures out how to make an open three, I don't see that getting any better either. His job as a floor spacer just seems non-existent. And then option 3 would be to look to trade him, but in the offseason. And when I said two solutions go hand in hand, I think that's where this lies in. I think trying to get Horford to fit this team for this year, get to the playoffs, see how he looks in the playoffs. If he amps it up a level and he is phenomenal defensively and we play the Bucks and he's crucial in stopping Giannis, okay, you keep him for another year. If we get to the playoffs and he's the same guy and he's shooting 17% from 3 and he can't even log 10-plus rebounds and he can't guard Giannis and we lose in the second round, we're going to trade him. And it might just be a trade where we can get whatever the heck we can back. Whether it's dumping him for bad players or convincing team to take on his deal and we have to send draft picks away, you gotta move on from him. So that's where I think we're at with Al. Again, I think people take me as an Al Horford hater or like I don't like him. When Horford signed with the Sixers, it really made no sense to me when it happened in the offseason. But I want him to succeed. I want nothing more than Horford to start logging 20 and 10s every night with Embiid out. Show us why we signed you, man. Like, return to a semblance of that all-star form back with the Hawks or with Boston when you were just lighting us up every night. Get us back there. Like, it's my main goal right now is to convince Al Horford to be good again. If that means posting more trade articles or talking about how bad he is in a pregame or talking about him on the podcast, if I can bully Horford into being a slightly above average center, slightly above average power forward, whatever he wants to be, just knock down some open shots in a while, I'm all for that. While we're on the topic of how Al Horford fits into this Sixers team, we'll dive into what I mentioned before about my personal opinions on the roster construction. The 76ers roster and the way general manager Elton Brand built it this offseason has been under a ton of scrutiny. It's obviously not worked out to the extent of what we thought about us running the East and being the number 1 seed, but it's also not been as terrible as some people have felt. I mean, you see some crazy trade rumors on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever it is, articles, like, you've heard about trading Simmons and trading Embiid and swapping Simmons for Russell or Embiid to the Clip, like, whatever. A blow-up of that level outside of a potential Horford swap, and even then, I would, as much as Horford irritates me, I would hold off on a Horford deal until the offseason. You got to see what he does in the playoffs first. But anyways, looking at roster construction, before we dive into the trade rumors, as of right now, who do I personally think fits the roster? As in, I don't want to say untouchable. I mean, there are some untouchables on the team. Simmons is untouchable, Embiid's untouchable, Josh Richardson's untouchable, Tobias Harris is untouchable, Matisse Thybulle's untouchable. And I'm at the point, this might sound crazy, I'm starting to lean Korkmaz into that untouchable range. He's been stupid good the last couple games. And not just the, spot-up shooter, 3-point guy, D&3 guy. Like, no, he's scoring in a multitude of ways. And he's crazy young. He's like 22. Like, you kind of look at him and you get this vibe, like, all right, he's from Europe. He's been in the league for a couple years. Like, no. Like, he was a whimsical stab in the dark by the 76ers scouting department. And I mean, he wasn't even supposed to be back on the roster. A lot of people don't know this, but he was actually, our team option was declined this offseason, or this past offseason, and he was set to go re-sign with Turkey, go play ball in Turkey. And we missed out on Kyle Korver, so Elton Brand called him up and said, hey, bud, you want to come back? And he did, and he wasn't projected to get a ton of minutes, and Brett Brown has faith in him, and he's been pretty good. So untouchable is probably a strong word for Furkan. But as far as a good fit on the roster, I think he's one of the good fits. The team can't shoot. He's a shooter. No reason to move him. Outside of that, I think the Burke and Neto combo, they both drive me insane defensively. I mean, they are terrible defensively. But as far as being a backup point guard behind Ben Simmons, who logs close to 40 minutes a game each night, you're not asking a whole lot from either of them. Don't turn the ball over. Score 10 points once in a while. I think Burke's the better one when it comes to offensively. I think Neto's a little better defensively. Kind of pick your poison. If a deal at the trade deadline requires one of them, if a team's super pressed about getting Trey Burke, you trade him. If they really want Neto, you trade Neto. I think at one point you have to pick a backup point guard. You can't just keep alternating both and then expecting them to be ready come playoffs. But I'm perfectly content with the backup point guard situation. Unless you can bring in a legit six-man scorer who can also play the two-guard position because you really don't want to take away minutes from Ben Simmons, I'm fine with those two. Norvel Pelle, who is on a two-way contract at the moment for at least, I think, one more game, and then he has to go back down in the G League for a little bit. My guess is he will be back up for the playoffs, and he'll probably log significant backup center minutes. I mean, he's good. He's got minimal offensive game outside of layups and catching alley-oops, but he is so disruptive on the defensive end of things. I mean, he's a rookie. He's 26-year-old. I mean, he's not much of a rookie. He's been in the G League for a while. But he's so disruptive, whether it's getting his hands on the ball, blocking shots, obviously, getting rebounds, tipping the ball, just altering shots at the rim. I think he has a legit future as a backup center. Similar to Burke and Neto, you're backing up Joel Embiid. And with Al Horford on the team, you're never going to be expected to play 20 minutes a game. When Embiid's sitting a night out, you don't need Pelle to come in and start. But as far as being a backup center, just across the board, come in, give 10, 8-10 minutes a night, block a couple shots, get a couple rebounds, he fits exactly what the team needs in that position. As far as who doesn't fit, and this goes with guys that I would include in a trade ordeal, James Ennis doesn't fit this roster. I know the fans love him. He's been a fan favorite. A lot of people are happy that he came back. He took a pay cut to return. He's just so hit or miss on the court. He's not a natural shooter. You can just look at his form. He's not a natural shooter. As far as a bench guy goes, especially Ennis, who at some point people consider to be a six-man, he just doesn't provide a lot of offense. He plays slightly above average defense, maybe even average. At points, he just fouls. He gets offensive, which his main thing is he hustles and he gets offensive rebounds. I can't have one of our top bench pieces in the rotation just be a guy who gets rebounds. I think Brett Brown's starting to feel the same way. The last two games I noticed, James Ennis didn't even log a minute until the second quarter. Maybe this is due to him being phased out because of a trade or Brett Brown just realizing he's not all that good. Kyle O'Quinn has really just lost his role because of Norvel Pelle. Nothing you can do there. Pelle's just better. Mike Scott, who was so good for this team last year, especially in the playoffs. I mean, he just looks terrible. Dude can't buy a bucket. His three-point shooting percentage is now below average compared to the rest of the league. He can't play defense. He can't rebound. It's hard to imagine, unless he magically finds a shot again in the next month or two, it's hard to imagine him playing any sort of role come playoff time. So outside of our own roster, potential trade likely trade offers, players to bring in, who do I think fits that ordeal? A guy that's been linked to heavily to the 76ers, been rumored a lot, is Robert Covington. Obviously, he was a process legend for Philadelphia. So he fits this team in one way, and that's if the 76ers are committing all in to just being a defensive juggernaut. Forget the offense to an extent. Don't improve on the shooting at the deadline. Let's just go defense. You got Simmons, Richardson, Embiid, Horford, Matisse, now Robert Covington. Defense, 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 defense. If that's the route they want to go, he fits the team. If you're bringing him in to be a shooter, he's not going to fit the team. He's not a 3-point specialist. It's not his role. Outside of pure shooters, I think you have Bogdan Bogdanovic. That's a tongue twister. Davis Bertans, Marcus Morris, Langston Galloway. Any of these guys, if you can land, Wayne Ellington, whoever, just come and just be a volume shooter, jack up threes. It's going to open up the court. Again, that's kind of going with the opposite mindset of the Robert Covington trade, saying, okay, our defense is fine. Let's get a legit shooter. I'm all for any of those guys. The big wild card is if you want to truly go get a sixth man, I think Derrick Rose is a guy to target. The Pistons are looking to trade away everybody. They've said that publicly. He plays point guard, but you could probably slot him in at the 2 next to Simmons once in a while. Or even just log backup minutes behind Simmons and tell him, hey, can you get us 10, 15 points? So he's kind of the wild card in that scenario. Now, before we wrap things up here, we've gone over a lot today, but I wanted to jump into our Q&A time. I actually had a healthy amount of questions today, so if you submitted a question, appreciate that. I love interacting with you guys. Said it before, I'll say it again. This is my favorite part of the show. So question number 1 from Dean Longstaff is, David, can you tell me can you tell me what you know about Jonah Bolden and Zaire Smith? Why are those two not playing at all? Well, to answer the first part of that question, what I can tell you is they're down in the G League. Both are playing actually pretty well. Zaire Smith is averaging about 13 points a game while shooting over 50% from the field. His 3-point percentage is up in the mid-30% range. Jonah Bolden's averaging about 12 points per game and 7 rebounds. So why are they not playing in the main roster? Well, Zaire Smith is obviously a first-round pick for us. Or we we swapped picks in the first round to get him. He's just lost his role in the team. He was Matisse Thybulle before Matisse Thybulle was a thing. And he had a health scare. If you're not familiar, he had an issue where he was allergic to sesame and he lost 40 pounds of muscle. I wrote a whole article on it at phillysportsnetwork.com. Go check it out. I explain in depth what happened with him. But yeah, he just doesn't really have a role. And I think the Sixers are at a point where would they rather him come sit the bench on the main roster as he continues to rehab and get healthy, or get legit minutes in the G League. G League makes more sense. Jonah Bolden kind of in a similar situation, a little less valuable, I think, to the team, where there's just not much of a spot in the rotation for him. You signed Horford. Pell's obviously better. I think Kyle Quinn's still probably a little bit better. And then when it comes to trades, those are two guys who could get moved. Not a big point in getting them adjusted to the rotation and the game plan now if they're just going to get traded in a couple weeks. But that's where they're at. That's why they're not playing. Especially Zaire Smith is likely to get traded. He's our most valuable prospect. But yeah, that's what they're doing. They just don't really have a role in the rotation. Maybe after the deadline, you see them get more involved once it's stapled in that they're going to be on the team. But until that deadline comes, wouldn't expect them being moved up anytime soon. Question number 2, and this is from Michael Morgan on Twitter, and this is a really good question, by the way. I was ecstatic when I saw this. So he says, quote, with Joel Embiid losing 25 pounds in the offseason, and now with his major finger, boo-boo, would you agree with the notion that this is due to the loss of strength and conditioning coach Todd Wright? So a couple of things to break down. A, losing weight in the offseason is a good thing. We were all excited when Embiid started losing weight in the offseason. Don't think he lost as much as he alleged to. He did say 25 pounds. It looks like he maybe lost 5 to 10. But in today's NBA league, losing weight is always going to be a good thing for big men. You know, it's a new breed of center. You got to be quick. You got to be able to defend multiple positions. You got to be able to attack the rim. And you got to be able to stay healthy. And dropping weight is normally going to put less stress on your joints, ligaments, bones. Kind of the second part of that question. So now with his finger injury, which was a gruesome one, would you agree with the notion this is due to the loss of the strength coach? So, little background on Todd Wright. He was hired in 2015, so he's been with the team for 4 years. He left this summer. He went to L.A. with the Clippers. Before then, he worked with the University of Texas for 14 years in strength and conditioning with their basketball team. So, do I think this is due to the losing of Todd Wright? Probably not. I mean, the finger issue of all his injuries has been the most fluky. If you're not familiar with Joel Embiid's injury history, it's been pretty extent where he's either dealing with a serious injury each year that's put him out for multiple games or just continually game managing. The idea that Todd Wright, who's been here the last 4 years, and Embiid's been hurt pretty much at least once a year the last 4 years, the idea that losing him that then made a change, probably not. I mean, getting your finger snapped, getting the ligament snapped, there's no strength and conditioning you can do because of that. Like the losing or gaining weight, whatever that strategy was in the offseason before he left, it's not going to affect his finger. At the end of the day with Embiid, you can hire and fire as many strength coaches as you want. Him getting in elite shape is always going to be a personal decision. If there ever becomes a point where Embiid says he's tired of the injuries and he's tired of being called overweight, it's going to be a personal decision where he sits down and he commits to getting leaner and adding more muscle and getting faster and adding more stamina. The finger injury could be a blessing in disguise where he can work on his conditioning during the season and get in better shape for the playoff runs. But anyways, that's a great question. That's going in depth on something most people probably didn't even know we lost our strength coach this offseason. So I really appreciate giving me an opportunity to talk about that aspect of things. Third question we have today by a user on Twitter by the name of Trust the Process 2020. He goes, can Philly realistically keep Richardson after his contract expires in the offseason after 2020/21? I don't want him to leave. Hey, I don't want him to leave either. I love Josh Richardson. I think he's been exactly what the team needed. Out of that Jimmy Butler ordeal, you were never going to get a player as good as Jimmy Butler, but Josh Richardson has done exactly what we needed in terms of developing as a defender, developing as a late game scorer, and continuing to keep pretty much his same points per game, if not higher, while being paired with better players. Before in Miami, he was able to shoot a lot more than he was in Philly. So he's been great. I want him to stay too. But to clarify, he actually has a player option in 2021. So the first kind of hurdle to that is, would he accept his player option? My guess is he wouldn't. With the way the NBA is shaping up, anybody can get a max contract. If for some reason we're contending or we've won a championship by then and he wants to stay on a cheaper deal to give the 76ers more flexibility, that's up to him. My guess is he would opt out to take a big payday, either A, from the Sixers, or B, on the open market. So would we be able to keep him? Hypothetically, yes. I did some research. I couldn't find a legit answer on it, but we should have his bird rights. The bird rights essentially allow you to go over the salary cap to retain your old players, your own players. Excuse me. But because we traded for him, we should, in theory, get his bird rights to come to the team. So in a couple years, if he wants a pay raise, take his contract up closer to 20 mil, extend him for another 4 or 5 years, we like the fit. He likes the fit. We've won a championship or we're very close to winning a championship by that time. Then yeah, we should realistically be able to retain him for multiple years. And the final question we have today by a listener named Steve Morgan, he goes, quote, should the Sixers try to make a trade for J.J. Redick? Now, this is a fun topic because I think having J.J. Redick back on the team would make the Sixers tremendously better. But it's just crazy unrealistic. The Sixers made a pretty blatant decision this offseason that we're moving off J.J. Redick. Whether it was a good or bad idea, it's yet to be proven. We'll see how we look in the playoffs. The Pelicans have just now kind of hit their stride. The idea that they would then go trade J.J. Redick right as they might start to creep in the playoffs, it's not going to happen. He's not going to get moved. If the Pelicans were terrible, he might get moved. Don't know if the Sixers would be in on that. He got paid. We'd have to move a lot of different contracts to make the money work out. When it comes to hypothetical Sixers trades this upcoming deadline, it's all about the money. The Sixers have to find a way to not take on any extra salary. We're already over the cap. We can't just keep adding salary after salary. Redick's on a pretty big salary. We have to move a multitude of players. It's not realistic in the slightest. It's a fun concept, and I want a player like J.J. Redick, someone who can be a volume shooter for us, space the floor. And there's guys like that on cheaper deals who obviously aren't as good, but they're going to play that same role. As we wrap things up today, just looking ahead to our next couple games, it's only getting harder. We got the Nets on Monday, the Raptors on Wednesday, 2 big Eastern Conference games, and then the big one, the Lakers on Saturday. First 2 games of the week are going to be on the road. It's yet another chance for the Sixers to prove they can win on the road. And then the Lakers come to the Wells Fargo Center. That's going to be huge, but we're at home. I would like to think we're going to show up, especially if Anthony Davis isn't playing, which he might not be. Obviously, no Joel Embiid for the rest of the week. He's going to be reevaluated soon. Don't expect him coming back anytime in the near future. But with that said, if you made it this far, I appreciate you listening. Again, I'm David Esser with the Philly Sports Network. A lot of content to go over today. Things should only pick up going forward. Episode 3 of the podcast. Signing out.